My name is Margaret, but people call me Maggie. I am 72 years old, and I live alone in a small cottage on the outskirts of our sleepy little town. For most of my life, this house was a refuge for my family. A husband, children, even grandchildren for a while. But time has a way of stealing everything. It leaves behind quiet spaces and echoes of laughter that never come back. Across the street lives Evelyn. She's 74, just 2 years older than me, and yet she feels decades wiser. Evelyn lost her husband Peter 5 years ago. I lost mine, Charles, a decade ago. In the early days of my mourning, I couldn't even look at Evelyn. She had everything I'd just lost. A partner to hold her hand in the evenings and drink tea with in the mornings. When Peter passed, Evelyn didn't come out of her house for months. Her curtains stayed drawn, and the garden she once loved grew wild and tangled. I saw her grief in every unkempt bush and overgrown flower bed. It was an odd comfort to see someone else drowning, even as I hated myself for thinking that. One crisp October morning, as I stood on my porch nursing a cup of coffee, I saw Evelyn stumble outside. She looked frail, but determined. In one hand, she held a watering can. In the other, a small pair of garden shears. She began to prune her roses. Her hands trembled as she worked, but there was purpose in her movements. I don't know what came over me, but I crossed the street, my slippers crunching against the fallen leaves, and offered to help. At first, Evelyn seemed hesitant. She eyed me as though unsure of my intentions, but then she nodded. We worked side by side in silence, the only sounds the snip of shears and the whisper of the wind. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Over the next few weeks, our lives began to intertwine. Evelyn started inviting me over for tea, and I found myself lingering longer each time. We talked about everything: the children we'd both raised, the men we'd both lost, the ache of growing old in a world that seemed to forget we existed. But there were things we didn't talk about, things that sat between us like unspoken secrets. One evening, after the first snowfall of the season, Evelyn invited me to stay for dinner. The warmth of her kitchen was a welcome contrast to the cold outside. She'd cooked a stew that filled the room with the smell of rosemary and garlic. "Maggie," she said softly, her voice trembling, "do you ever think about what it would be like to be loved again?" Her question caught me off guard. My first instinct was to pull my hand away, but something in Evelyn's eyes held me still. They weren't just the eyes of an old woman. They were the eyes of someone who had lived, someone who still wanted to live. "I do," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it feels impossible. Like it's too late." "It's never too late," she said. After that night, something changed between us. Our conversations grew deeper. Evelyn started sharing stories about her childhood, her dreams, her fears. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. One snowy afternoon, as we sat by the fire in Evelyn's living room. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. I didn't pull away. "I don't want to be alone anymore," Evelyn whispered. Tears welled in my eyes. "Neither do I." For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. We didn't label what we had, and maybe we didn't need to. All I knew was that in Evelyn, I'd found a kindred spirit, someone who understood the ache of loneliness and the fragile beauty of connection. The world around us didn't change. The days were still short, and the nights still cold. But inside that little cottage, with the fire crackling and Evelyn's hand in mine, I felt warm. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The seasons shifted as they always do. Spring brought color back to the gardens, summer warmed the air, and the fall leaves painted the world in shades of gold and crimson. But something inside of me had changed, something that no season could take away. Evelyn and I spent more time together, and with each passing day, I found myself falling deeper into her presence. It wasn't a wild, passionate sort of love like I'd experienced in my youth, but something quieter, steadier. It was the kind of love that crept into the corners of your soul and warmed the spaces you'd long forgotten about. It was a quiet partnership, a mutual respect and understanding. We began to do everything together, shopping for groceries, visiting the local library, and tending to the gardens that we'd once neglected. There was a comfort in the routine, a sense of normalcy that I had long forgotten. When we weren't together, I found myself counting the hours until we could be. There was no longer any room for loneliness in my heart, not when Evelyn was by my side. But then came the evening when the unspoken between us finally spilled over. It was late, and the two of us had been sitting on Evelyn's porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping on warm cider. The sky was clear, dotted with stars that seemed to stretch on forever. I looked over at Evelyn, who was staring up at the sky as though searching for answers in the constellations. Her face, usually so composed, was softened in the dim light, her eyes reflecting the depth of the universe. "Maggie," she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty, "I've been thinking about us, about this." I froze. My heart beat louder in my chest, as though it too had been holding its breath. "You know," she continued, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blanket, "I never thought I'd have a connection like this again. I've spent so many years just existing. I've let the world pass me by, and I didn't even realize what I was missing. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to say that I understood, that I too had been existing rather than truly living. The words felt unnecessary. Instead, I let my touch say everything. "I don't want to let go of this," she whispered, her eyes searching mine, as though seeking permission. A lump formed in my throat. I swallowed, my mind racing, but my heart was sure. I had lived long enough to know that some things don't need to be explained. Love, when it's real, doesn't come with labels or expectations. It simply exists. "I don't want to either," I said, my voice thick with emotion. It wasn't fiery or desperate, but soft and tentative, as if we were both tasting the possibility of what we hadn't dared to imagine for years. It was everything, years of unspoken need, of loneliness, of longing, all wrapped up in a moment that felt timeless. Afterwards, we didn't need words. We simply sat together, the warmth between us growing even as the night air cooled. We didn't talk about what had happened that night. It was an unspoken understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that our relationship had crossed a threshold. We were no longer just two old women who had found companionship in each other's company. We were something more. As time went on, I felt lighter, as though the years I'd spent alone had finally lifted off my shoulders. The weight of the past, the grief, the regrets, all of it faded into the background as Evelyn and I shared the present together. We were creating new memories, ones that didn't carry the same heaviness as before. Sometimes when I wake up in the mornings, I still can't believe this is my life now. There are mornings when I look across the table at Evelyn, her hair a little more silver than it was yesterday, her hands a little more worn, and I wonder how I got here. How I got to a place where the heartaches of the past don't define me, where love has come to me again in a form I never expected. But then I remember, love doesn't always come in the way we think it will. Sometimes it comes when we least expect it, when we've given up on the idea of it. It can come quietly, like a soft breeze that brushes against your skin without you even realizing. And when it does, you hold on to it, no matter your age, no matter how many years have passed, because love, true love, is never too late. I smile at Evelyn, my heart full, and we continue with our lives, side by side, finding joy in the simple things, in each other's company, in the quiet moments that make life worth living. And for the first time in a long time, I know that the best parts of life are not behind me. They are right here, in this very moment. The sun was setting on another golden afternoon, the last of summer slipping quietly into fall. Evelyn and I stood in the garden, tending to the daisies she had just planted, her hands gentle but strong as they brushed over the petals, and mine steady beside her. The air was thick with the scent of earth and wild flowers, a fragrance that always reminded me of something tender, something fleeting, something worth holding on to. We had been together now for nearly 2 years, and in that time, the world outside our little cottage had become a distant hum, a backdrop to the life we had quietly, almost defiantly, built together. We no longer needed grand gestures or elaborate declarations. We understood each other in a way that was beyond words. It was a knowing, a silent agreement that this, we, was enough. Evelyn looked at me, her face bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. She had always been beautiful, but in that moment, with the warm light catching the silver strands of her hair, she was radiant. Her smile, always so warm, carried the weight of everything we'd endured and the lightness of what we had discovered in each other. "Maggie," she said, her voice quiet but full of meaning. "I used to think that I'd be alone forever, that the best parts of my life were behind me. But you've made me see that there's still so much left to live for." My heart surged in my chest. "Evelyn, my love," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've given me more than I ever imagined. You've shown me that it's never too late. That love, real love, can be something we choose, no matter how many years we have left. And with you, I choose this. I choose us." In that moment, as the last rays of sunlight kissed the earth goodbye, it was soft, tender, but it carried with it everything we had built, everything we had discovered in each other's arms. And as we pulled back, breathless but content, I knew that I was right where I was meant to be. The world outside our garden continued on, indifferent to the love that bloomed between two old women who had found each other in the twilight of their lives. But inside this little haven, time didn't matter. We had found something more enduring than age, more enduring than the fleeting moments of life. We had found each other, and that was all that mattered. In the quiet of that evening, with the stars beginning to appear in the sky above, I realized that the best parts of life had only just begun. We had time now, time to savor the moments, time to love fiercely, time to be everything we'd never dared to hope for. And in that, I knew, love, in all its forms, was never too late. Never.